Hello. Thank you for joining us today to learn how to host successful employee volunteer events despite the pandemic. I'm Jim Starr, President and CEO of America's Charities, and I'm happy to be joined today by our friends at Give to Get, Amber Greviskes, Account Director, and Tory Woods, Senior Manager for Social Impact Programs. For those of you not familiar with America's Charities, we're a 501c3 nonprofit with 40 years of employee giving expertise. We inspire employees and organizations to support causes they care about to bring more resources to the nonprofits that are changing our world. We do this by supporting all your social good needs and goals across all corporate and employee giving, grant making, and volunteerism efforts, and by working with our partners like Give to Get, who excel in developing strategic and engaging volunteer experiences. We help you get the impact you're trying to achieve. For the last decade, America's Charities has commissioned research to identify trends, attitudes, and perceptions in employee workplace giving. The number of employees who volunteer and the amount of time they give is growing. In fact, volunteering tops the chart when you look at the top 5 motivations for workplace donors, be it through paid time off to volunteer or offering matching gifts and grants to nonprofits based on employee volunteer service. Employees value volunteerism and actually expect their employers to provide opportunities for giving through employer-sponsored programs. But as an employer, how do you actually manage and measure successful employee volunteer programs and create meaningful and engaging events that align with your goals? This has been a challenge for many employers long before the pandemic. But after COVID-19, even some of the most established employee volunteer programs were forced to reevaluate and pivot their programs to what has become this new normal. It's now become clear that moving forward, volunteer events will need to transform to include individuals who work remotely, in hybrid situations, in person, at various levels of the company, and in multiple markets. The good news is, whether your employees volunteer in person or virtually, the same tried and true best practices still apply. And after we finish our conversation with Amber and Tory today, our goal is for you to feel prepared and confident hosting your next event. Before we dig in, I'd like to introduce you to Amber and Tory and let them share a little bit about their work at Give to Get. Amber, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber, an account director at Give to Get. Throughout this presentation, you'll learn more about employee volunteering best practices, see case studies, and get a peek into our measurement work. Although we have time for questions and answers at the end, feel free to introduce yourselves now and drop questions in the chat as we go along. Now, a little bit about us. Give to Get is a social impact company with 25 years of experience creating and refining brands' CSR strategies, planning and executing community engagement events for consumers, employees, and meeting or conference attendees, and measuring the results of all the good work you do, whether you're a Fortune 10 company or a local nonprofit. As a cause-agnostic company, we can help you support the causes that matter most to you, whatever they are. Before the pandemic, that meant high-energy, in-person volunteer events at local nonprofits, in corporate offices, or in hotel ballrooms around the world. When the pandemic began, however, we created virtual volunteer programs that supported healthcare workers and first responders, as well as seniors who would be facing isolation, and a number of our clients' favorite causes like the environment, animal welfare, education, individuals experiencing homelessness, pediatric patients, and more. When social justice issues came to the forefront this summer, we worked with the National Urban League to design volunteer opportunities to support their career reentry programs and determined how to provide STEM kits to organizations like Black Girls Code. And now, as companies consider inviting their employees back to the office, we're building safe in-person programs to engage those who may be a bit anxious about the return to work. In my role, I oversee our accounts so that clients who are working across multiple markets or utilizing multiple services have one contact that they can turn to, while our social impact projects team, which Tory is part of, focuses on making individual events come to life. We started this work on the consumer side, producing concerts that you couldn't buy tickets to. Instead, you had to earn them by volunteering for 4 hours. Our first event was in Telluride, Colorado, but since then we've produced events around the globe in Australia, France, Israel, Japan, South Africa, the UK, and other countries. In a minute, we're going to show you a 30-second video from our work with Coca-Cola in South Africa, just to give you a taste of how exciting volunteer events can be. The employee volunteers that we work with now, pictured here from Semantic offices in Singapore, Ireland, multiple California locations, and Arizona, may be a bit older than the young adults you'll see in the upcoming video, but the excitement around our events remains the same thanks to carefully chosen programs, music, snacks, beverages, and t-shirts, every volunteer's favorite item.
Ladies, it's your song, so as soon as this come out, you should get out on the floor, go and get your sexy out.
Looks like fun, right? At the time we hosted this event, AIDS had devastated South Africa and the townships outside Johannesburg with large populations but poor infrastructure in particular. Coca-Cola and its bottlers were also at odds. The company wanted to find a way to bring everyone together and used our community engagement platform to do so. We invited teenagers and young adults to earn a chance to volunteer and therefore a ticket to one of our concerts. Volunteers transformed small preschools run out of community members' homes into fully operational schools that could receive government funding by building furniture, painting walls, and creating play areas. We hired professionals to assist with electrical and plumbing work and helped the teachers apply for government grants once the updates were complete. People felt proud of the work they'd done and how they'd assisted their communities. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, was able to renew its license to operate. The volunteer-only celebration concert was the reason many of the volunteers initially decided to help their community, but they continued to give back long after we'd moved on. It's a story that we've seen play out again and again with Boost Mobile, with Orange, and with other partners. We had always known the power of community engagement, but now we had numbers to back up our theory. 38% of people who had never volunteered before chose to continue to support the organizations that we had introduced them to after their volunteer experience. And so a decade ago, we expanded. We now offer virtual and in-person employee volunteer events like days, weeks, or months of service around the globe. We've used volunteer events to assist with leadership development programs where attendees help girls build and code robots. We've also worked with national sales teams who tie no-sew blankets for those experiencing homelessness during their happy hour networking events. Over the years, our mission has been simple. We want to create engaging events that empower individuals to give back to their communities in a meaningful way. And we want to introduce volunteers to nonprofit partners that they can form long-lasting relationships with.
So, Amber and Tori, one of the big challenges we've heard from employers over the years has to do with employee participation. Getting employees to sign up for volunteer events, sustaining that participation beyond just one event, and getting employees to not just sign up, but also to show up is, quite frankly, easier said than done. Clearly, employees are interested and want to help others. What do you recommend companies do to actually get people to act on that desire to volunteer?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So I'll jump in here and provide some insights from the project team at Give to Get. I know we have some wonderful organizations on the call, as well as corporations of all sizes. So while the application may be slightly different, the takeaways and goals are going to be similar. A little bit later, we'll talk about actually how to create those meaningful volunteer events. But first, how do you create the desire to do so? So we've found that many corporations and nonprofits have similar challenges when securing volunteers for a program, especially with the pandemic. There are many restrictions in place, but let's not forget about what we all know to be important. Sometimes we just need a little bit of a refresher. There are a few main factors that we've found to be successful and important when hosting an engagement. Most importantly, creating that experience and providing opportunity. So first I'll touch on the experience. Regardless of whether an event is in person or virtual, make it an invitation to participate. You want your volunteers to feel elite and that this program was made specifically for them to do good. We recommend also having a max capacity, especially if it's going to be a virtual event, and also a registration deadline. Thirdly, think about your ideal volunteer or audience and invite them to attend, whether that's new hires, interns, or C-level suite executives. The second is your opportunity. To embed volunteering and social impact in your company or nonprofit, you need to provide the opportunity and make it fun and easy. Keep those programs fresh, have new ideas, and have new ways to volunteer be posted frequently. Third, have concise communication. Be sure to clearly state what the volunteer's obligations and objects are. What will they be doing and how long is the commitment? No one likes to be blindsided, and they'll be much more comfortable and excited going into the program if they know exactly how they can be prepared. And then lastly, create an impact and share the success. So Amber in a little bit will speak to how to measure and evaluate your programs, but it's important that the volunteers can either see or understand the impact that they're making and that their valuable time was appreciated. So I'd like to share two case studies with you. First is an in-person event. As a growing tech company, Box knew that they needed to stand out and make some changes in how they managed and shared their impact with their employees. So after years of spending thousands of dollars for their company-wide holiday party, their CEO actually wanted to redirect those funds into doing good, or as you can see from the photos, making mom proud. So this resulted in the Global Day of Giving for all of their offices, including headquarters in the Bay Area, Austin, New York City, Tokyo, and London. So throughout the day, we actually shared digital content with photos from all of the different locations and even some offsite projects that were happening concurrently to really create that connection between the programs and build that company culture. They made it a formal holiday and actually allowed employees to take that PTO and the opportunity to volunteer for a minimum of 3 hours on that day. So using the funds that were for the formal party, our team was able to develop a full day of events at their offices when then they, in the afternoon, went to a smaller scale party. So we took over their lunchrooms and common spaces and really created an engaging, as you can see, decorated, high energy event with DJs, trivia, and more, such as the t-shirts, as Amber had mentioned. This overall was a carnival of giving, which is a platform that we've had great success with. We have multiple local nonprofits in each office location so that the individuals can choose the projects that they want to participate in and causes that they really cared about. Going back to, making that experience meaningful and impactful for them. So the second year of the program, the spaces filled up immediately. Through this approach, Box created culture, experience, and the opportunity to give back for all of their employees. So this next example is external facing at a very large scale. One of our partners, Cisco, made a huge pledge and gave $50 million to Destination Home, who support individuals experiencing or at risk for homelessness in California. They wanted to design a program that was for their premier trade show of the year, Cisco Live, to give their partners, consumers, and vendors the opportunity to help solve the pressing issue of homelessness. To fulfill this request, we built a social impact zone and pop-up stations that were strategically placed throughout the venue and hosted at peak hours, such as when volunteers walked into a cocktail hour, they were able to put together a quick kit, or as they were going to see a keynote speaker or go have lunch. So all of the attendees had the invitation to attend, and we made it easy to do so. Cisco's mission and impact was also well integrated into the marketing and infographics, as you can see in the photos shared, which really explained the problem and how everyone was helping to solve it. So I know we're not able to get in person right now for these large meetings and events, but as they continue to evolve into the pandemic, it's really important to highlight the business objectives and share the impact.
So we know that employee volunteers are vital to nonprofit missions and impact, but it's imperative that their offering is considered for more than just from a transactional viewpoint. Employers and their employees, they want to help nonprofits, but they don't also know all the time the best way to go about it. And unfortunately, that can sometimes result in a company contacting a nonprofit about volunteering from what's really a one-sided view, telling the nonprofit what the company needs. We'd like to do a one-day volunteer activity for a large group of employees, on next Thursday, just as an example. Well, all too often when faced with such a request, a nonprofit is, very concerned about their relationships with the companies and with their donors, and they don't want to burn bridges or lose the opportunity to form a relationship with a company, and as a result, may not actually ultimately benefit from the actual volunteer activity. And we all know that's not what anybody wants at the end of the day. There needs to be an alignment between the needs of nonprofits, the interests of employees, and the expectations of the companies. All good collaborations are a two-way street, or perhaps in this example, a three-way street. And that is no different for nonprofits and companies that want to partner for the greater good. How does Give to Get's approach ensure a meaningful volunteer experience that truly benefits all parties?
That's a great question, Jim. At Give to Get, we look at ourselves a little bit like matchmakers, setting up great first dates between corporate teams and nonprofits that they want to create a long lasting relationship with. We take in all of the information that's important to the corporate client, things like dates, times of day, causes to support, and call through our nonprofit database to provide options that meet their needs. We also work with the nonprofit partners to scope potential volunteer projects to ensure that participants are able to see the long-lasting impact of their work. And we make sure that these organizations have ongoing volunteer opportunities that employee resource groups or individual employees can continue to take advantage of without us. Most importantly, though, because we're a third party that focuses only on social impact work, we don't reveal who our clients are, so there aren't any hurt feelings if a nonprofit isn't chosen to host a volunteer event. We also ensure that potential nonprofit partners don't hear your brand name before you've chosen them as the beneficiary of your CSR efforts. That way, no one agrees to host an event that they're not equipped for, just because you're a top telecommunications, technology, or engineering firm with deep pockets.
So those are great points, Amber. And we're really in a unique position here because there are ways to communicate gently and strategically as you're doing outreach. This applies for both nonprofits and corporations. As you all know, the planning process is critically important and usually works best when perhaps a global CSR team sets some guidelines and then lets the local teams choose the projects, causes, dates, and event formats that work best. There are endless nonprofits that need support, including those that may be on the call today. So extend those relationships that you already have. Or if it's a new partner, utilize those vetted by a credible source, such as America's Charities. I'm going to break down a few best practices that we've found to be successful, but we do have these resources also available to you. So these programs are just as much for your company culture as it is for the nonprofit partner. If you're a nonprofit, be sure to see both sides and the bigger picture. But one idea is to create a scorecard or a rating system. We use this document frequently so that all stakeholders can see the nonprofit information, any objectives, venue details, and also the short-term and long-term impacts of giving back to this organization or hosting this program. When we develop these for our partners, we show multiple options for social impact to flush out the best project for the business and company at that time. So while one option may seem like perhaps the most engaging project, it may actually not be the best option to align with your mission, goals, and that localized impact. Also ensure that you have enough time, funds, and support to make the event happen. As Jim mentioned, if we're looking to host a program next Thursday, that may not be possible for our nonprofits or to secure the volunteers. So give yourself enough leeway and runtime. So we can honestly host a completely unique webinar on just this topic and how to find where the budget is and the best projects available, but being mindful of the time, we'll send these resources through after the webinar. But first, I'd like to touch on a few different aspects and types of projects. So first will be the virtual and skills-based programs. As I'm sure you've all experienced, these can be very difficult. It seems to be what we're doing right now during the pandemic and while we're all at home. So either there may not be the need from the nonprofit, perhaps limited good options available, or it's hard to value that impact. We understand that. But they can also be quite successful, especially during this hybrid time. There are many great resources available that provide lists of opportunities, such as the weekly email from our friends over at Realized Worth. So I won't spend too much time on this. Instead, some of the best practices that we've found are to provide a variety of options. Can the volunteers participate on their own time, perhaps in the evening or on a weekend? Or is it a structured program? Are we allowing them to put their knowledge into practice to support the organization? Or does the nonprofit need that type of support? Also, keep the groups small, as I mentioned earlier. We find that sweet spot is about 25 to 50 volunteers if it's going to be a virtual program, because it allows the opportunity to engage with each other. Perhaps you're meeting someone on a virtual program that you've never worked with before, but that you've emailed in the past, and seeing them face to face. You have to set that opportunity for them to engage as volunteers and create that socialization. Also, be prepared to avoid that Zoom fatigue. We understand it. There's many studies about it. So perhaps play some music as you're setting the stage and as people are joining the call. Have some prompt questions ready. Utilize the breakout rooms. Make it so that it's a comfortable virtual space for your volunteers to be in. Also, communication is key. So be sure to send those calendar invites, reminder emails, and the thank you emails afterwards as well to encourage them to keep volunteering or to learn what else they can do to participate. With that, encourage your volunteers to track their hours and use that data to see which options were most successful and what your interests are for your volunteers. Lastly, can you adapt any of your programs to be virtual, especially right now during the hybrid situation? So one example that I would like to share is with one of our clients, Emerson, which was a skills-based program that has now turned virtual. So for them, we developed a program for their rising leaders, which had a multi-day seminar where they learned, how to be the best of the best. And with that, they wanted to integrate social impact and giving back to the local community because that's something that's so important to their company culture. So we hosted programs for them throughout the world, including at their headquarters in St. Louis, also in Dubai, Barcelona, Tokyo, and even here in Denver, which is where I'm located. This program allowed volunteers to utilize their backgrounds and actually have a hands-on engaging opportunity with youth from Girls Inc. or a like organization where they built and coded robots. They then were able to have a skills-based presentation style where the volunteers taught the young girls how to present and perhaps how to sell their robot. So being that we're not able to get together, this event actually turned virtual with the program. And in the next few weeks, we're hosting a virtual coding with some of these girls actually, which I'm personally very excited about. So while we're not back in person just yet, we have many resources available for these checklists and how to run successful events in person. But some key takeaways from our in-person programs are the following. First, logistics and planning. As I'm sure you all know too well, there are so many logistics and components that go into an event. What projects will the volunteers do on site? What happens if supplies run out or the volunteers don't have enough time to finish a mural? Will we be able to come back and finish it? Will we hire an artist to complete the project? Do we have that in the budget? Also, what projects are ADA or friendly for children? So now going back to our experience, which I mentioned before, how are you going to create that company culture during the event? Is it something as simple as branded goods? One thing that we found to be really successful is to have leadership support the opening remarks or to have an engaging debrief after the event. Then you can determine what really resonated most with the volunteers and put those best practices into future programs. Most importantly, localize the impact. Use insights from local team members or champions to learn what their employees would like to do. For example, following leadership interest, we hosted a global week of service in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. The impact in Atlanta looked very different from the programs in Singapore or China, where the social justice and civil rights movements didn't necessarily apply. So we worked within the pillars to really determine that mission-based program that worked for the local offices and continued with the pillars of the company. So choose the opportunity and option that is best for your company culture, because you're not only investing in the community, but more importantly, in your employees and company. So that was a lot of information to take in. I understand that. Feel free to send some questions and we'll have plenty of time to address them later. And as we talk about what we're doing next.
So Tori, I actually do have a couple of a question about kind of what you just spoke about from the audience before I get into my next question. And it really has to do with some of the logistics piece. As you're looking at kind of the volunteer events, in person or virtual, and perhaps even, more focused on the virtual thing, is there a more or better effective way to get more employees involved? Do you look at like maybe a couple of large day-long events over the course of a year for large groups of employees, or maybe it's multiple smaller events scattered throughout the year? Is there any magic formula for that?
I wish I could say yes, there is. We've experienced a variety of those. The biggest takeaway that I would say is to steer away from a global day of service. And the purpose behind that is because you want your employees and your consumers and the community to know that you're making a difference throughout the year and not just showing up for one day and perhaps putting your name out there and sending out a press release. So the more frequent of opportunities we've found to be successful. So for example, we work with a corporation that's a little bit smaller. They're about 55 employees, and they understand that we're not going to be able to do something monthly with them just based on their budget and also the size of their company. So instead, we host a quarterly event for them, and it's something that they then look forward to as a social component, kind of closing out the quarter or kicking off the quarter. So that's an example for perhaps like about a 50-person company. Now, if it's a lot larger, we do recommend having at least one per month that is scheduled by the CSR team or social impact team. Of course, individual business units or individuals could volunteer on their own, but having one that is publicized and sponsored by your company per month shows that commitment and keeps it really fresh as well. So many of our corporations that we partner with actually align their projects based off of what's happening throughout the year, whether that's a specific month that we're celebrating, as we're kind of coming into Earth Month here, or month of May being military appreciation, and then pulling in those ERGs or pillars to really align with them. So all in all, there is no magic formula, but we do encourage, finding that balance that allows it to create that demand, but also not too many that it's just like another volunteer platform where it's like, oh, I could sign up for that, but that'll be there next week. So I'll just wait until next week to do that.
Great. Thank you, Tori. So let's talk a little bit about the world that we're living in today and for this past year. We know, obviously everyone has felt the effects and the impact of the pandemic and how it's changed a lot of what we do and how we do things. But in our work with our companies, as well as with our nonprofits, there have been a couple of things that haven't changed. One is employees still want to volunteer. They still want to find ways to help their communities. And nonprofits are still delivering services. It may be a little bit different, but they still have their mission to meet and their needs to fulfill. So how has this impacted how you're working with both nonprofits and companies and getting them engaged in good social work?
That's a great question. Last year has definitely been probably one of the most difficult that we've seen for people who want to do good. There's a lot of different things that are happening with nonprofits, and they're constantly changing what they do, whether it's to meet regular public health guidelines or to work with communities that are being impacted both by the pandemic, but some of the other issues that we've seen pop up. Nonprofits have changed the way they've operated dramatically. Organizations that once worked with people in person are now working with them remotely, and their needs have changed a lot too. Those that may have accepted donations in the past of gently used clothing or other items just can't do it. And also it kind of pivots how we deliver our offerings, but it hasn't changed our mission. We still want to empower people to give back to their communities in a way that creates long-lasting, meaningful connection, especially because so many people want to help right now. Tori talked about how we changed or kind of altered existing programs, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the volunteer program that we launched that's virtual, just because we really found out that so many of the skills-based programs that we were trying to work within weren't the best experience for the volunteer. Volunteering with Translators Without Borders or supporting a missing maps type program felt a little bit removed from the beneficiaries, and nonprofits who maybe needed help with a website redesign or a marketing program didn't necessarily know how to get started or how to project manage those programs. One-on-one skills-based programs like mentoring children, assisting job seekers, and working with seniors, we found out were really hard to scale. Even before the pandemic, it would be hard to get people registered and have them show up on time. Sometimes you'd have to coordinate transportation and do things like that. But now with the digital divide, it's just been impossible for some groups to join in. So I'll talk a little bit about our virtual volunteer experience, which is a little different. We send all of the items that volunteers need to assemble nonprofit donations to their homes, like a meal kit service. Whether they're making paracord bracelets for first responders, blankets for pediatric hospital patients, or bee hotels for our flying friends. We'll also send your team calendar invites with a link to a video conference so that they have a scheduled time to volunteer together. Nonprofit representatives will join the call so that everyone is grounded in the organization's mission, the work they do, and how the items that the volunteers assemble will assist the nonprofit and its clients. A lot of people don't think about it, but those cards you write that we usually include with our STEM kits or our paracord bracelets or our items for seniors are really their favorite things. Our social impact program managers, like Tori, join as well to work with volunteers to ensure that all of the questions about the projects are answered. When volunteers finish assembling their donations, they are able to put those donations back in the box they came in, apply a prepaid shipping label, and send those donations to the appropriate nonprofit partner. Although we have a catalog of options available, we're constantly adding new programming to meet the moment, whether that's a program around COVID or disaster relief, helping children prepare to rejoin their classmates after learning remotely for more than a year, or holiday items. And Tori's going to walk you through really kind of how we've seen this program come to life.
To be completely honest, this program has been a huge success, and we found it to be very meaningful for especially our nonprofit partners and the volunteers that participate, because everybody does want to give back right now, and unfortunately, we're not able to go get our hands dirty, so let's do some sort of a hands-on project. So what's unique about these programs is that it's a wonderful opportunity for company culture, and again, that localized impact while we're not able to be in the office. So one of our clients, Lockheed Martin, used to host localized in-person programs on their off Fridays during the fall. With the pandemic, we helped shift these to our at-home programs, which first started with specific business groups or perhaps a department as a team building opportunity. In some cases, the employees hadn't even seen each other on video, for almost a year. So being able to have that socialization was proven to be very successful. The programs then opened up to all employees and were regionalized with the impact and then the causes. So a group in California or on the West Coast were able to support the fires that were happening, whereas individuals on the East Coast supported the rescue missions and first responders for the flooding that happened in the Southeast. Overall, social impact was made by over 500 volunteers and over 15,000 in-kind donations. So some really impressive numbers, which allowed individuals, we had many first-time volunteers for Lockheed Martin as well, which was really exciting. In alignment with these successes, they have also expanded their focus areas to now include community response, and they're no longer focusing on only volunteering the month of October. So going back to how frequently should we do this, we were hosting them every other week over the course of the fall. Another example is with our client PG&E. They had difficulty securing volunteers for programs, and their company was experiencing great turnover and a public bankruptcy. So corporate culture really needed a little boost there. We started working with them for a small 30-person program in an event for a region in Northern California that was often overlooked. So these employees were able to work with an existing partner, the American Red Cross, and it was a mission that really spoke to the employees and provided them that specific opportunity. Again, creating that invitation and a demand for them to attend. Now we actually host monthly events for different cause areas and regions throughout PG&E's territory. So going from an event that we were barely able to fill Now they are sold out within a few days because this has become a part of their company culture, and it has spread through their social impact and emails that are going out. So also in a result, because of these successes, the department's budget has doubled, which is pretty impressive. And we know sometimes it's hard to pull those funds. As we know, virtual volunteering isn't going anywhere. These programs will continue to be an opportunity. And in fact, they're growing into new business functions such as retail groups, contract employees, and other hourly employees as well. Regardless, after each program, we provide detailed metrics that highlight how the company made a difference in their community so that they can then share that impact.
So, Tori, let's talk a little bit more about measuring impact. The most common metrics that we see companies use to track their volunteer programs are things like, how many employees participated, how many hours of their time the volunteers gave. But we know these kind of metrics alone really don't equate to impact, and you need to demonstrate more than that to secure buy-in from leadership and to help sustain the investment in the program as well. So, these kinds of metrics, they do matter. There's no doubt about that, and are necessary to track, especially for things like volunteer grants. But how can employers and companies measure the true value and the impact of their program in alignment with the specific causes and the communities they're supporting? So basically, how do we shift from measuring outputs and really focus on actual outcomes?
That's a great question, Jim. After 20 years, we're glad to see that people are finally paying attention to more than just inputs and outputs. As you can see, from this measurement timeline, we could do a whole discussion on measurement entirely. But we'll provide a brief overview to get you thinking about how you could measure and get credit for all of the good you're doing. First, it's important that you start thinking about measurement before you embark on any new CSR strategy, let alone an activation. You'll need to know what success will look like, how you'll track KPIs, and how you'll tell a story to your leadership team. You'll also need to be able to account for places for growth in the future. I'm assuming we all know how to track inputs and outputs, so let's talk about outcomes on the community and some ways that thinking about measurement early on can help you choose unique volunteer programs. We talked a little bit earlier today about our experience with Coca-Cola in South Africa. The work that volunteers completed made it possible for preschool owners to apply for much needed government funding. They didn't just simply paint or build or create something. Similar applications are available in the US. You just might need to look a little bit harder for them. 4 years ago, Digitas, an advertising agency in Chicago, chose to work with an elementary school that had not had use of its third floor for years. The lockers on that floor from the 1970s were a hazard and had to be removed if the school wanted to receive a grant to improve that area. But removing the lockers was impossible on the school's existing budget. Volunteers, however, could remove the lockers and give the school the ability to apply for grants that were needed to transform those rooms that had been abandoned for so long into photography labs, yoga studios, and other community spaces. Thinking about the big picture is not an anomaly for Digitas. When local schools have merged, they've also updated the school's logos and branding and added murals throughout the new campus. For those of you who have ever worked in ad land, these types of projects could easily cost $100,000 in billable hours. So what you're looking for really when you complete those scorecards that Tori was mentioning earlier is that unique extra incentive that your group can bring. But measuring success isn't just about the community. Your company benefits too. On the HR side, there's employee recruitment and retention to think about. As you can see from these numbers, everyone wants to do good and work for companies that do so as well. With the average cost of hiring and training a new employee reaching into the thousands of dollars, a robust employee volunteer program could save your company a pretty penny. And as we move into the post-pandemic world, where about 26% of workers will be looking for new positions in the next year alone, your employee volunteer program could be a key differentiator for local talent. On the marketing side, being a good company goes pretty far too. Consumers put trust in and purchase from purpose-driven brands. Patagonia made waves not only for its high-quality clothing that flies in the face of fast fashion, but also its worn wear program that keeps clothing out of landfills. Through its partnership with Fairtrade USA, Patagonia now offers more fair trade certified sewn styles than any other apparel brand, impacting more than 72,000 workers in 10 countries around the globe. And for someone like me who loves to hike, their activism in protecting our public land and decision to pledge 1% of sales to the preservation and restoration of the natural environment has made me one of their biggest fans. By highlighting both HR and marketing savings, most CSR leaders have found a way to push leadership teams for a bigger budget. But measuring outcomes alone is no longer enough. We're moving into a phase where more companies want to understand the total value of the good they're doing. Working with our friends at Pro Social Valuation Service, we review primary research and evidence-based data to show an actual ROI where you can see how each dollar you invest becomes X dollars of social capital created. Using the Impact 2030 measurement framework, we can also map the value created to one of the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you're not as geeky as I am, you can think about it this way. An input is the number of hours spent volunteering, and output is the number of meal boxes assembled. An outcome is the number of people fed for a certain amount of time thanks to those boxes. An impact would look at the relationship between childhood hunger and other factors like educational attainment. Because one child was fed for a week, how much better did he perform in school during that time? Now, the value would ideally show that because I packed a meal box at Cisco Live, a child did not have to struggle with hunger that week. We'd account for learning achievements, we'd look at defrayed healthcare costs, we'd evaluate behavioral changes, and we'd also consider other previously unaccounted for value that's now been added to his life. Most importantly, we'd look at the value to others in his community. Once the child has learned certain concepts, could he teach them to others? Was he less distracting to his classmates, helping them learn more? How did he evolve into a role model? Now, what if I packed that meal kit 20 years ago in Akron, Ohio? Could I have supported someone like LeBron James, who faced homelessness in his youth, but became a world champion basketball player, an Olympian, a philanthropist, and an activist? We're just scratching the surface of what measurement could mean, but at least now we're asking the right questions.
Amber, those are great points. And looking at trying to measure impact or track outcomes, it's always, as you guys have mentioned, it's important to engage the nonprofit in that activity, particularly as it relates to their work and their particular service and mission. But oftentimes, the nonprofits themselves struggle to really measure or connect their direct service to a particularly downstream long-term impact as well. So, kudos for you guys for engaging, the whole facet, right, in that impact discussion, and even others that may be outside of that particular engagement experience that you've designed. Do have a question from the audience around measuring impact, particularly as this individual company is looking at expanding their definition of volunteering, perhaps to go into skills-based or virtual and different types of things, and the types of activities that they're engaging around. But they want to make sure that as they go through that journey, they're not compromising impact or the difference that they're making. Any pointers or things that they should be thinking about as they embark on that journey?
Yeah, I think if the question's really related to, how to make sure that your volunteer opportunity is authentic, you're going to want to make sure you double check with does it align to your pillars? Does it align to what you're trying to do to move forward? So at the beginning of the pandemic, people were very interested in getting others to volunteer, but maybe they've pulled back a little and said, you know what, playing video games for a fundraiser for an hour is not necessarily the direction we want to go to. So it's really about figuring out what works for your company and what really feels authentic to you. And once you do that and really look at that pillar, that milestone, that kind of North Star, making sure that you just double check and say, does this align? Does that align? So build a framework at the global level, make sure that you explain it to the local community. And if there are particular groups that want to pivot a little bit or change it, just make sure you're pretty flexible to include it as long as it still resonates.
Great. Thank you, Amber.
Mhm.
So I do have one last question, and then I know we've got a couple of questions from the audience as well. But since I'm moderating, I get to ask mine first. What are your key takeaways for those who are in the CSR space now?
Yeah. More than anything, the last year has taught us that now is the time to be bold. The pandemic has taken so much from us, but it's given us this opportunity to recreate a world that is stronger than before. So, our key takeaways are simply this: you are defined by what you do. Making promises isn't enough. Last summer, many companies posted black boxes on Instagram to support Black Lives Matter. Few have followed through. Earlier this month, however, Band-Aid, or I guess it was last month now, but Band-Aid announced that they were rolling out their new R-Tone line with bandages in more diverse skin tones. That's an action that they took based on that promise they made last summer. Next, you need to make your work meaningful for nonprofits and your employees at the local level. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you really need to tap into those areas where people live, work, and play. You might reach out to smaller local nonprofit partners who reach clients in unique ways and who you can build long-lasting relationships with for years to come. And our final takeaway of the day is simply this: purpose is accelerating like never before and has become a C-suite issue from the standpoint of employee engagement, retention, and company culture. Just last month, Chipotle and MasterCard announced that they were tying their senior executives' bonuses to ESG goals. They're not the first company to do that. Many companies are also creating C-level roles for those who can deliver on the purpose-related promises they've made. More than anything, though, we're really excited about the direction that the world is moving and what the future holds. We really hope that everybody else on this call is too. I'm assuming, since we've got a lot of CSR folks and nonprofits in the room, that everybody is. I feel like 2021, 2022 are going to be super exciting.
They are. They will be, I'm sure of that. Tori, Amber, thank you both for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. I do have a couple of questions from the audience. And one deals with budgets. So what if a company hasn't set aside funds for these types of things? How do you build something from scratch? How do you start from scratch, with some of the things that you guys have been talking about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And not everybody has a budget, and that's okay. You're not alone in that. What we recommend is maybe starting with what your interests are and finding a good nonprofit partner as well. Some nonprofits have or volunteer events where they do not require a donation fee to be associated with it, but whereas they just really need that manpower. So some good examples of in-person would be perhaps a food bank or doing a park cleanup. There's also a lot of virtual opportunities that have no costs associated with it, such as answering questions for students on Career Village or hosting a program that supports missing maps. So there are resources out there for no cost programs, but I will challenge you a bit. Perhaps you don't have a specific CSR budget, but where else can you find budget from? Perhaps you're already hosting a monthly happy hour. Could you redirect those funds from that social engagement and actually put that monetary amount to a volunteer event? Or perhaps your marketing team has a rollout that they're planning. How can you maybe pull some of the funds from HR or from marketing into getting together and doing good so that then they can share what the experience was and providing that, those opportunities and what you did to your consumers. So there's a lot of different ways that we can, address finding budget within your company already. But there's also ways that you can volunteer on your own, or perhaps asking your team members to all, pitch in. And if you're doing a park cleanup or want to organize a program similar to that, everybody bring their own tools that they may already have in their garage and setting the stage for it, getting a table, maybe having some snacks that are donated, and then, making it an event at a low cost budget.
Those are all great ideas. Thank you. Thank you, Tori. So I've got a couple of other questions. I'm going to try to combine them to wrap things up because we're approaching our time limit here. But a lot of folks in this space, as you guys know, are always interested in learning what others are doing. What are some of the best practices? What are some of the benchmarks? And so this question kind of speaks to that. And folks are interested in knowing, is there a standard or an average or a benchmark on, how many hours do companies provide to their employees to volunteer, either at work or as paid time off? And then kind of tied to that, for companies that are providing charitable grants to nonprofits that people volunteer at, Dollars for Doers is the most common name. Is there an average amount that's being provided for those kinds of things?
So I can touch a bit to the financial component to that. We have corporations that we work with where there's no employee engagement and Dollars for Doers program. Whereas we have others that have, maybe $10 an hour, all the way up to $50 or $100 per hour. But those are for a lot larger, I'd say Fortune 10 companies. For example, PG&E, they allow a matching donation of up to $500 per year. So as opposed to tracking your hours, it's kind of a one-time monetary donation match. So there's a few ways that you can do that. In regards to the specific hours that they, encourage you to volunteer, I think that really goes back to our company culture. How are you as a company or a CSR team encouraging and creating those expectations that are also realistic? And perhaps that's something that you're going to need to kind of figure out your best practices within your company culture. So again, if there are too many events posted, it's going to look like a volunteer match or those great platforms that are out there, and you may not have that response. So starting small and then working your way up and seeing, how they continue to, the registration is filled out or sold out, is a great mile marker for that to then set your expectations for the following year.
Yeah, Tori, I think that's a great point. Our experience in this space is that it's really hard to paint a standard.
Yes.
There is no kind of average, if you will, and it is largely driven by where that company is on their own CSR journey and experience, and what their culture supports, what their leadership supports. And there's just a wide range of things that can be done, regardless of company size. It really is more driven by the leadership and the culture and where folks are on the CSR experience. But we are up on our time. I want to thank both of you for sharing your stories, your expertise and your knowledge. The components around the virtual volunteering, I think, are just spot on, particularly for where we are today, but not just today. These opportunities to virtual volunteer are here with us to stay in new work environments and things of that nature. So thank you all, and thank you for everyone participating on this. There will be some additional materials we'll be sending out to all of you over the next coming days. So thank you so much.